All right, viewers and listeners, good morning, good afternoon, good day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another interesting episode of Global Arena on my YouTube channel, Global Arena TV. I'm your host, Umar Isa Dandago. As you know, for the past couple of weeks and months, we've been focusing a lot about American politics from different angles and looking at it from different lenses and prisms. Today, I've got an important personality called Professor Hans Noel. He's an associate professor at Georgetown University at the Department of Government, and his research interest focuses on party ideology, political parties, and he has also written a book called Political Ideologies and Political Parties in America. He has appeared a lot on different domestic and international media outlet, giving his analysis on the current happenings. This is a very tight race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And one important thing for our viewers to know is that Professor Hans was at the DNC in Chicago in the US state of Illinois. DNC means Democratic National Convention. That was the first time I got to know him when he participated on the TRT Worlds, the Newsmakers. Well, Professor, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me on my YouTube channel.
Thanks for having me. This sounds like fun.
Well, definitely. Let's get started. I'm very much interested in getting to know a little bit about yourself. Your biography. Who is Professor Hans Noel?
So I'm a professor of government at Georgetown University, and I study political parties, ideology, coalitions, that sort of thing. I originally was a journalist. I worked at a newspaper in Virginia before going on to start study politics more intensely. And I went to UCLA and got a PhD in political science there. There, I also got involved with some people working on studying political parties and presidential nominations. We wrote a book called The Party Decides that was fairly influential. My own book, Political Parties and Political Ideologies in America, is a little bit more about the coalitions among the parties. It takes a longer scope of things. And so I do work on ideology, parties, and coalitions, mostly in the United States, although I do take a look at a couple of other places too to get sort of some context. I was at the DNC this year. I try to go and see things up close as much as I can. Been to the RNC in the past, DNC. I go to presidential primary events in Iowa and New Hampshire and kind of keep track of how that whole unfolds. I'm not a journalist, but that on-the-ground experience is really useful to give some useful context. But most of what I would bring to our conversation now, though, is the sort of academic and scholarly perspective.
All right, let me ask you this question. We need to get it clear and straight. Did you attend both the RNC, the Republican National Convention, and the Democratic National Convention as a researcher, as an objective researcher, or as a supporter of one of the parties?
So as an objective researcher, right? So I was at the RNC actually a few cycles ago in 2016 when Donald Trump was first nominated. I was there in the hall talking to people just as an observer, and then again the same here. But when you get in the room with everybody and they're all passing things around and so forth, sometimes it's hard to distinguish who's there as a supporter and who's there as a journalist. But I approach it from a sort of analytic perspective.
Oh, that's very good. But I don't know. I don't know whether you have a particular law in the United States of America that prohibits professors, academics like you from expressing their own political opinions. Does that happen? Do you have something like that in America?
There's no law that says you can or can't express any opinions. There's some restrictions sometimes on what you do in the classroom, but even that is generally not very strict. But what there is there's a sort of a norm really that I don't want to be pressing my politics on my students or anyone else. Different people approach that in different ways. If you don't study politics, maybe it doesn't matter as much to you. But since I do, I really make a point to in the classroom and in the media to sort of not take sides. Although I also want to be honest about what I understand to be going on, even if that does tend to favor one side or another.
Yeah, all right, definitely. And I understand that American people are very much sensitive to some certain issues. One of them is public opinion or expressing their own opinion publicly, which means it's hard for a professor, an academic like you, to be speaking on the media and saying that I'm going to vote for this person or that person, right?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. Different people have different needs, but certainly if you come out and say I'm voting this way or something, then some people will be concerned. Oh, well, then we aren't going to be impartial when you are grading students, or you're not going to be impartial when you're doing analysis. So I've got a book that's just coming out right now that's on factions within the Republican and Democratic parties in nominations. And you want to believe that what I and my co-author Rachel Bloom, what we say is our best understanding of what's actually happening, and not an attempt to paint one party poorly and another party, and and so that distance is really important.
So, as a political scientist, somebody who is teaching politics in the classroom, how do you strike a balance between talking about politics from an objective point of view, impartial, balanced, sort of neutral point of view, to sort of discussing it or allowing or disallowing your emotions or other people's emotions from getting in? I don't know. It's kind of complicated. How do you balance that? Because you are teaching students.
Yeah, I mean, it can get complicated, but I mean, most of what we do in class is not about sort of like, let's debate the issues and talk about who's right or wrong about something. We want to talk about, so how does the system work? What are the effects of raising a divisive issue or not? What are the reasons why the parties are taking the positions they stand? Why are they changing on them, and so forth? And all of that you can talk about regardless of what you think about the specific issues. It does sometimes come up, especially as students who want to debate the issues, and they bring those things. Sometimes it's very easy just to say that's not what we're about, right? We're going to steer things in another direction. But you want to have organic conversations, and so sometimes you let that happen. One of the things that I've noticed is that my students here at Georgetown are pretty open to hearing about things from other sides, right? And there's somebody in there they disagree with intensely. The tempers might get a little bit warm, but they're also like, okay, wait, but I'm going to listen to your position, and I'm going to understand it, and I know you're going to do the same thing with me. And since the deep debate about the issues of the day is not a big part of the class, it's pretty easy to keep things objective and analytical, and step back and say, okay, regardless of who I want to think, who I would like to win this election, here's who I think will win it, and for these reasons.
So you're teaching your students to think critically and to open their minds and listen to other people, even if they don't believe in the same cause they believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm helping with that. I think a lot of I think people come into this with a lot of pretty good skills in that, regardless of what we do to teach them. There's only so much we can cultivate. But yeah, for sure, we try to cultivate the idea that our job is to think about what is what is actually happening, and not let's have a chance to express our opinions on the hot issues of the day.
Yeah, definitely. One final question before we move on regarding your students. When I recently finished my university, my undergraduate degree, and some of our lecturers, very fine ones, encourage this culture of debating and thinking and critical thinking. Some of our lecturers would just table a topic and give us the opportunity to voice out our own opinions. Whether you're right or you're wrong, the only time when they could step in was when you mention something that is wrong or out of order. Then they would question you, or they would caution you, and they would say, okay, this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. I don't know, your students, do you still teach undergraduate students? And if yes, are they interested? Are they politically interested or politically apathetic?
Oh, they're very interested. I mean, I think especially the students who take my classes, they're very interested in politics. That's why they're taking them. Georgetown is a school that's, associated with politics. So a lot of the people who come here, even if you're not going to be a politics major, you're not going to come here if you can't handle being around people who are politically engaged. And you're right. The thing that we do is the same as you're describing. Let people have their opinions, but bring in reality. One difficulty of late has been that some basic facts about how the world works have become politicized, so that some politicians are saying, no, that's not how it works, and others are saying, yes, that is how it works. And then you want to step in and say, okay, well, this is the actual answer, and that's taking a side because two sides are going in different directions. But I think, having established that that's not what we're mainly about, it's a little bit easier to do that. But it is fraught. It's one of the tricky things when one side of a political debate differs on the facts, and then they raise those questions.
So are they interested, are they interested in only American politics, domestic politics, or they are also interested in the US foreign policy towards the Middle East, towards Europe and Africa? Are they interested in international relations?
So, there's a variety of people, but I think most of them are definitely interested in U.S. foreign policy, especially towards the Middle East. There's a ton of interest in U.S. policy towards Gaza and towards the conflict there, and what the United States should or shouldn't be doing to help one or the other or both sides of that conflict. There are protests on campus. People, definitely get, engaged in that question on both directions. Same with concerns about, what to do with Ukraine and anything else. Certainly, U.S. foreign policy is a big deal. We also just have a lot of students who are interested in international politics in general. We have a lot of international students at Georgetown. So I've got a lot of students who are from other places, and of course they come with that perspective, and then they want to talk about it. And I've got a lot of students. We have the School of Foreign Service, people who are likely to go into either literally the U.S. Foreign Service or into other sort of international policy domains or business and the like. And of course, they're quite interested in the rest of the world.
Yeah,
most Americans, honestly, are not as interested, but my students are.
Wow, excellent. I'll be delighted to one day speak to them virtually, as I once did to the students of one of my mentors, Professor Jeff Kelly Lowenstein at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. I'll be delighted if that opportunity comes up. I can talk to them about Nigerian politics and the media stuff that we've been doing, definitely. Yeah. So let's move on. Did your career in journalism help you understand the political dynamics of the US and international relations, and how much of a help, how much of an assistance has journalism been to you in shaping the trajectory of your career, in making you who and what you are right now?
Well, I think there's two ways in which journalism has mattered and helped. One is that a lot of how we understand politics, one of the players in politics is journalism and journalism. So if you want to understand what's going on with U.S. politics, you have to understand how journalists are going to cover it and why they're doing the things that they're doing and everything else. In fact, that was one of the things I was most interested in when I started getting it. It's less of my interest now, but it's a big part of the story, is like, how is this story going to be covered? And that matters. But also, I think beyond that, the sort of approach that journalists take is that same sort of analytical step back, try to understand what's happening, try to get the answers. And the big difference, in fact, the reason that I left journalism and went into academia is the time scale, right? You're on a deadline for most as a journalist, so you got to turn things around very quickly, which means you need to get an answer very quickly and then report what that answer is to people. And while that's really important and good, I'd often, you don't get the whole story because you can't, dig a little bit more. But even then, you got to spend maybe a month or something, or a couple of months. It's very unusual to spend more than a few months on the same story to really get into the detail. Whereas I work on projects where I'll spend years on a book trying to understand what's happening. And so it's just a different scale. And I find that scale both really important and useful, but the same task at all levels is really important. And I think, one of the things that journalism trained me to do is to think, sort of try to step back and have, maybe not literally an objective view, but at least a view that is, not from the middle of having strong opinions and views and trying to understand what's actually happening.
Yeah. I'm sorry to poke into your personal life, but I suppose you may be in your 50s. So journalism has, right? You may be.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Journalism, the modern journalism, the kind of journalism that we see right now, we operate in the journalistic world that we all live in, the AI, the social media, the journalism of X and Twitter and stuff like that, is entirely different from the journalism of your time when you started. Do you think now journalism is no longer what it was, especially when it comes to covering all the coverage of politics in America and other parts of the world. Right now in America, there are media organizations who tend to lean towards the Republicans, others lean towards the Democrat, and this is obvious. It's clear. Everyone knows that. Should it happen like this?
Well, so one thing that's interesting about that is that, journalism used to be much, much more partisan. Right? So journalism in the in the 1800s, right, there were Democratic leaning publications, weekly publications, and the like. And, it was just known, like, this newspaper is a Republican newspaper, and it's going to be this way. And really the sort of notion of, let's be more objective, let's step back, let's not take sides, is something that kind of came to arise around the time of, sort of increasing investment and economic growth, and a lot of involvement of ordinary people in the stock market and everything else. And they wanted to have some kind of source of news that was not going to take sides on policy, because they wanted to know, like, what's actually happening in business or whatever. And so then that, of course, spread and it became a norm. And it was the norm that I think I grew up in and a lot of other folks grew up in. But it's not surprising that the pull of taking sides is there again. Partly it's the market. People want something that says, this is, here's why you're right, and so forth. So, a Fox News is more entertaining and interesting to a viewer than somebody who's like, well, we just don't know the answer because we don't know. And so some of that's just there. I do think things have changed a lot, but I also think that there's some of that same attempt at, let's get the right answer. Let's find out what's happening. Certainly the value of, let me tell you the story that's actually going on, regardless of whatever I think, that value is still there. The problem is that some people will say they have that value, and then yet clearly they say things that advantage one candidate, and others will say they have that value and will say things that clearly advantage another candidate. And some of that's just, disagreements about reality or about facts. Some of it's the, way in which the market eats away at your other incentives. But I think most journalists really do want to tell the story as accurately as they can. And it's hard, especially when more and more of the sort of high-powered, high-paying, and well-funded media is all 24-hour news channel. So you can't be out working the streets because you're on TV all the time. And then a lot of the funding for other things is much less. And so it's much harder to put the energy into finding out things from the rest of the market. So you don't have as many people, walking around asking people, what's going on the floor of DNC, for example. But I've always been of the view that, information and some knowledge about how things work, it will find a way. People who want to do it, just as you're, doing something here on a different medium than what used to be a big deal, and that we're just in a place where there's a lot of creativity and change, but in the end, I think people still want to do what journalism is supposed to be about.
Yeah, definitely. So all right, let's move on to the contemporary American politics. Muhammad Adam Tidum Murtala, one of our colleagues here at Hikima Radio in Kano, he asked me to put this question to you. Why do you think the US election generates a lot of global attention? Why does the world care so much about the American politics and elections?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One smaller reason is just that the U.S. media is so dominant, right? So much entertainment and everything else is from the United States, and so we're obsessed with it, and so now you all have to be as well. That's part of it. But I think there's a bigger reason, which is that the United States is a hegemonic power in the world. It influences things. U.S. foreign policy matters. There's a reason why people are protesting in the United States and pressuring the U.S. government to try to end the war in Gaza. The United States isn't a party to that war. Why are you not protesting Israel and telling them to stop? Well, the answer is that the U.S. policy and arms sales and support matters in that place. It matters in what's going on in Ukraine. It matters in lots of other places too. And so I think in the same way that
I'm sorry to cut you off. Some people accuse the U.S. I'm sorry to cut you off. Some people accuse the U.S. of arming the Israelis, and thereby potentially the Israelis are using the American-made weapons to kill the Palestinians. So that's why people are protesting on the US campuses for the US to stop the arms funding and whatever to the Israelis, or
That's right.
at least pick up the call and say, "Hey, Netanyahu, stop it."
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, that's true. It's the U.S. support. I don't think it's quite true that the U.S. could just pick up the call and tell Netanyahu to stop it, but he certainly could say, we're not going to give you any more weapons. We're not going to give you any more resources. We're not going to support this anymore. And then that would have consequences. I think it's tricky. Global politics is not my world, but it's complicated to just say, we'll pull the plug on this. And, there are reasons why the United States wants to have a strong relationship with Israel. And so things are delicate, right? It's not literally Israel answers to the United States, but the United States has this big footprint and it pushes people around. And so, of course, it matters who's in power there, right? If it's somebody who's going to, double down on support for Israel, that's different than somebody who, maybe still would still give weapons to Israel, but it's going to be thinking, hey, what can we do to try to get a ceasefire and that change? Like those are two different policies and they matter which one happens. And then, of course, yet another thing that some people would be not on the table in the United States. But what is on the table in the United States affects the world.
Yeah, definitely. So, because like in the beginning of your explanation, you talked about American media is so powerful and dominant. A lot of people follow the American media, and you even mentioned the word entertainment, and Hollywood just struck me. Is it okay? Because I'm a big fan of watching American TV series. I've watched 24. I don't know whether you're interested in American TV series. I watched 24. I'm currently rewatching The Blacklist of NBC. I've watched a lot of them. Are you interested?
A little bit. I'm familiar with. I've seen some of both of those shows. I am familiar with them a little bit. Certainly, there's a lot of within American television. There's a lot of range of things, and I'm actually kind of interested in some internationally produced stuff from that's not from the American market, but the American. The American production of entertainment is so huge that there's so much. It's hard to avoid and hard not to find something you like.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of quality of production quality, and a lot of money in it. But then the question is regarding the politics, is it okay? I mean, is it possible for me to understand the complexities of the American politics by simply watching Hollywood films, especially political thriller, political dramas?
Well, I don't think it's possible to understand it entirely just by looking at those things, but I do think that they tell you something. The thing to remember is that most of those, if it's about entertainment, it's not necessarily about trying to sell a particular perspective. It's saying this particular perspective is going to get people to come and buy this movie and come and see it. And so maybe a little bit of something that's, inflammatory or exciting that might get people, but you generally just have some kind of vague stuff. You don't want to take positions that are really hostile. A really good example of this is the film that was out this last summer, Civil War, which is about a fictional modern civil war in the United States. And that movie does hardly at all goes into the actual politics of this fictional civil war. You don't know what the sides are fighting over really, but it does. The idea that there is tension and uncertainty that creates drama and everything else. And I think a lot of political content in American media is like that, where you'll use some political stuff to increase drama because people care about it, but it's not going to get into the details, and it's really not going to tell you that much about what people value and what they don't value. It's going to tell you what Hollywood executives think people will like to see characters valuing, and that's not unrelated, but different.
Yeah, and maybe there could be, not even there could be, but because there are a lot of researchers who have proven that the US government has been influencing some Hollywood films, like by, should I say, controlling or by overseeing and sort of adding and subtracting some stuff, generally influencing the script.
Yeah, I mean, I think overseeing and influencing, these sound like really strong words, and so they get some pushback. Oh, they're not literally controlling anything, but I think the influence is much less strong. It's more informal. So, take a movie like Top Gun. It was out just recently, and Top Gun, they use military equipment and they have access. all this stuff, right? They in order to make that movie, they have the star and everything, but they also have all this technology. Well, then the U.S., the Navy helps. They provide access to that stuff, but they're only going to do that if they feel comfortable with the story. And so then the filmmakers, they don't really care about the details. In fact, they probably want it to be like really sort of rah patriotic, because they know that viewers might like that. But they also, if they wanted to make a story that was more critical or something, well, then they're not going to be able to have access. They don't really care, so they do the thing that's nice. There's a lot more informal pressure that way. I think also just a lot of viewers, if you make a movie that's highly critical of the U.S. military, then some of the audience is going to take offense at that. And so then you have to say, well, why am I making that movie? Is this not going to make a lot of money? There's lots of films that are made, some of which are quite critical of things, but the big blockbusters, they're going to about that, and they're going to want to say a storyline. So it's not like somebody's pulling strings. It's more subtle influence, but it has the same effect.
That's fantastic. Another important question is, yesterday I was speaking to a colleague of mine, one of my co-presenters, Mariam Sal Adamu, and I told her about the interview that I was going to record with you, and she gave me her input. I was like, Mariam, what do you think about this election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? And she said that, I think if I were an American, I would vote for Kamala Harris. But the problem is that, as she said, I don't think the Americans are ready for a female president. Do you think Americans are ready for Kamala Harris, Prof?
So, I think one of the things, this is a really interesting question, and people ask this a lot. And I think that, part of the answer is, in 2016, there was a woman nominee, and, Hillary Clinton won more votes than Donald Trump, right? She won the popular vote. It's just that the Electoral College, the way that it works, Trump wins the election. So certainly, more Americans in 2016 were ready than were not. So they were willing to vote for her, just not in the right places and not in the right rules. But another thing is, some people won't be ready. Some people never be ready for a change like that. And that's what happens. This happens whether everyone's ready or not. I think the thing that's different in 2024 about the gender and race of that candidate is that Kamala Harris is not making a big deal about her gender and her race the way that, to a slight degree, Hillary Clinton did. There was a lot of breaking the glass ceiling and a lot of that kind of talk. It wasn't her only pitch, but it was a big part of it. There were no mentions of that at the DNC acceptance speech that I saw, and there were very little discussion of it. It's there, right? There are people who are very excited about the possibility, and they're really, you can find shirts that say, Madam Presidents and all this. You can see people who are excited about that possibility. But I think people are moving to that's one piece of the appeal to her, but there's other things too. I think in the end of the day, what's going to matter is not whether Americans are ready, but whether enough people in the right places prefer Harris, that includes her gender, but everything else, or Trump, but includes his gender and his attitudes and everything else. And it's really only one piece of the puzzle.
You said what matters is whether enough number of people are ready for her to become the president. What does that mean? Do you mean that Electoral College? Because it's
enough people in the right places in the Electoral College. Yeah, exactly. So it's going to matter. There's a handful of states, right, where those states are going to end up being the tipping point, right? They're going to matter where things go. California is going to vote for Harris, and we don't need to really ask much questions about it. It's Utah is going to vote for Trump, right? But Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, these are states that we're not sure. They're going to be very, very close, and they have electoral votes. The swing states, exactly. Yeah. And so those states will find out. And so really what's going to matter down in those, and I'll tell you right now, the vote in those states is going to be close, right? And so half of those states are going to be fully ready for Harris, and they're being comfortable with her, and they're going to vote for her, and half not. And then it's that little small margin that's going to matter.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes to go. Let's see if we can cover as many things as possible. A lot of people have been sharing what other people would term as conspiracy theories here in Nigeria, saying that Electoral College is a group of very powerful Americans that decide who becomes the U.S. president. Other people are saying, no, it's a system. It's a mathematical system. I don't know. How would you elaborate and clarify this complication?
Yeah, sure. So there's a little bit of a truth to both of those things, but it is not a powerful group of people who make the decision. It is people, right? They're actual voters that are the electors, but they vote the way their states instruct them to. In most states, it's against the law for them to vote otherwise. And in some states, there are ways to address it. Every state in the United States does things slightly differently. And so it is possible for one or another person to like deviate in some way. But for the most part, they're going to vote loyally for the party that that their state wins. And so it's really while there are people involved, it really is just a mathematical formula and a system. And that's the way to understand it.
So it's not a group of very powerful people.
In fact, a lot of them are just nobodies, right? They're just people. They're not nobodies, but they're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to get involved. I'll be an elector. Why not? That's kind of like a fun thing that someone might do who's kind of interested in politics, but they don't have a lot of independent agency to make things happen.
Good. So now Mubarak Awal Ungwauku has asked me to put this question to you. Why are we only hearing two parties in the United States of America, Republican and Democrat?
There's a long answer to that, but the short version of it is that our electoral institutions make it really difficult for third and fourth parties to succeed. With the presidential system, everything focuses on the presidential election. We have this notion of called Duverger's law, where if you've got single member districts or first past the post elections, which is we have both in the Electoral College and for Congress, then voting third party candidate is not wise typically. And so mostly you get things gravitating towards one of the top two, because if you like a third party candidate, but they're not going to win, then you're wasting your vote. Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot more to it than that, a ton more than that. And it's not just about that. But basically, we do not have institutions that encourage multiple parties.
Mm. All right, that's fantastic. So let's move on. Let me ask you this question. It's very, very important. From Nazir Samia, he asked me to with this question to you. Why do you think the African countries, or some of those African countries, especially those that are now under the military junta, have cut ties with the US? They are blaming the United States of America for having to do with the terrible condition they had found themselves in, the corruption, allegations, and stuff like that. Why do you think that happens?
Yeah, well, so I don't know much about the specifics of the politics in these countries, so I'm going to be sort of vague. But what I do think is true, we were saying earlier that the United States has this big footprint and this big influence, and that means that it is it actually does have effects. And even when it doesn't have effects, people think that it does. And so it's going to be something you're going to want to say is like, what's my orientation towards the United States is going to be politically relevant in a lot of places. I'm sure there's more detailed and more useful answer of someone who knows those cases better, but that's where you'd start.
Right. Okay. Donald Trump has survived at least 2 assassination attempts within 2 months or something like that. What does that mean? Is it going to give him an advantage that more Americans are going to pity him and saying that he's on the right path, he's on the right side of the history, and so let's vote for him?
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't seem that the first assassination of Trump really gave him that much of a bump. A little bit, but he also was going right into his convention where you'd expect to get something. And so I don't think there was much there. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of increased sympathy here. I mean, part of it is that the alleged attempted assassins, the people, they're not like left wingers. They're just crazy people. The current person, he's a supporter of Republicans and who liked Trump and now doesn't. And he's like, he's kind of got his own weird perception. So I think Republicans will try to make it be about that if they can. But so far, that has not been what's going on.
All right. When you were talking about the possibility of Kamala Harris to becoming the first black female president of the United States of America, when I asked you that question, there's this funny thing I want to put out to you. Okay, normally the US presidents are called Uncle Sams. So Joe Biden is Uncle Sam. What are we going to call her if she becomes the next US president? Auntie what?
I don't know. That is an interesting question. Yeah, I think Americans use the term Uncle Sam to refer to the whole government, since they probably are still comfortable using it that way. But I don't know. I mean, I think we're in a whole new world where, the first gentleman will be a new terminology, and how do we talk about these things, Madam President? There's been enough women heads of state and heads of government around the world that we have some kind of model about how to talk about it. But it's going to be new, and it'll be different.
Yeah, definitely, because right beneath the United States of America, from your southern border, there is Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, who has been elected as the first female president of Mexico. And I don't know, maybe if Kamala Harris were to become the US president, they would make a very good match. We've
Mhm.
got a lot to discuss, but then time is not by our side. What can you say about this interview and the kind of issues we have discussed on my YouTube channel?
Well, I think one thing, just to boil this all down. I mean, I think it is really, to me, fascinating how important U.S. elections are to people around the world. And as I said, it makes sense because the U.S. has a big influence. You can't vote, obviously, but there's no reason not to be in the conversation and talking and encouraging and even spreading the perception and important your values, what you think matters to voters who do vote. And we should be listening. And I think and I'm glad to have been here to listen now.
Yeah, definitely. So you enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, this has been excellent.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope when next we invite you, especially towards the election time or a bit after the election, you'll be able to come back.
Sure, I would love to.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm looking forward to speaking to your students anytime soon.
Sure. All right. Take care.
All right. On behalf of everyone that has contributed to the production of the show, my name is Umar Isa Dandago. Many thanks indeed to Professor Hans Noel from Georgetown University. I'm saying goodbye from Nigeria.
Goodbye.